Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and welcome to the Gun Violence Searching for Solutions panel discussion. Thank you to the Asbury Park Press and APP.com for arranging this very important chat. We are hopeful that this virtual forum will give the Monmouth and Ocean County communities an opportunity to hear different voices and learn from each other. In the recent days, weeks, months, and years, we hear story after story of tragic and often fatal incidents of gun violence in the street, at church, at the movies, in schools, and grocery stores, and at parades, and on and on and on. My name is Dr. Jennifer Edmonds. I'm the Dean in the School of Business and Digital Media at Georgian Court University. I will be the moderator for our discussion today, but more importantly, I'm a wife and a mother, a sister and a friend, and I wake up what feels like every day to another heartbreaking story of a community ripped apart by senseless and unnecessary gun violence. I am certain that I, like everyone else, wonders when will it stop and what can be done, which brings us to our discussion today. Please allow me to introduce our panelists. First, I want to introduce Pastor Semaj Van Zant, who is currently serving as the pastor teacher at Second Baptist Church of Asbury Park. He is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and has preached all across the United States, as well as Liberia, Africa, and Jerusalem, Israel. He has worked with leaders of faith communities, law enforcement, local and national organizations, along with concerned citizens, to tackle the devastating effects of gun violence. Welcome, Pastor Semaj.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Nikkia Jennings-Fitzpatrick, whose 23-year-old son, Jahaj McMillan, was killed in Asbury Park back in June 2019 when he tried to break up an altercation. Her son was a talented chef who brought leftovers to the homeless in Asbury Park and was on his way to begin a new career aboard a cruise ship. Following his untimely death, she founded Mothers Helping to Heal Hearts. Welcome, Nikkia.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Congressman Frank Pallone joining us. Congressman Pallone was born in Long Branch, New Jersey, where he grew up and still resides. He began his political career back in 1982 and has moved up through the local, regional, and federal elected political ranks, and just last year was sworn in for his 17th full term in the U.S. House of Representatives. Congressman Pallone represents New Jersey's 6th congressional district, which includes most of Middlesex County, as well as the Bayshore and oceanfront areas of Monmouth County. He serves as chairman of the Energy. Oh, I'm not finished. He serves as chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, which oversees legislation pertaining to healthcare, energy, environment, commerce, consumer protection, and the internet. Welcome, Congressman Pallone.
Thank you so much.
I am honored to host our conversation and hope to sculpt a dialogue that allows each panelist to share a bit of their story, perspective, and personal connection to the gun violence endemic. After that, I have a few questions that will allow us to navigate through the community's concerns, beacons of hope, and calls to action from a personal and community and a legislative perspective. If you are joining us live, you are welcome to pose questions through the comments function on YouTube and or Facebook. Pastor Semaj, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and share your connection and approach to addressing the needs of the community as they react and respond to gun violence?
Absolutely. Once again, thank you all for the invitation to be a part of this most important conversation. And because I believe that there's no one who has not been impacted by the hurt, the harm, the damage that gun violence, creates in our communities. And I have to tell you, so one of the when I started here in January at Second Baptist Church here in Asbury Park, New Jersey, I started on January 2016. And my first public event was the funeral of a young man, 26 years old, who had just returned home from Texas Southern University and was slain by gun violence. And that's my first public event. And it seemed like one right after the other. There were I'm conducting funerals. I'm talking to families. I'm consoling grieving mothers. I'm trying to ease the anger of fathers and siblings that are just upset at the gun violence that is taking place, and the just the damage that it's doing to our community. And so my introduction to pastoring in this area was to gun violence. And so it has been something that has been really just really a almost a pivotal a vital part of my ministry in providing comfort to those grieving families. And so I could not help but think and to act, what is it that we can do so that I don't have to continue to do funerals of young people whose lives are being snuffed out by senseless gun violence? And that began my work. That really ignited a passion and a flame within me to get to begin working within the community, to working with other organizations such as Mom Demand, what is it, Mom Demand Actions Against Gun Violence, and so many other organizations that are really about not just fighting and protesting and lobbying on behalf of legislation that helps to reduce gun violence, but also organizations that help to provide alternatives so that these youth can find other outlets for the energy, for the talents and their abilities, right? And so, and I also have the privilege of working in connection with the Asbury Park Police Department and the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office as a chaplain. And so in those multiple roles as pastor, as chaplain, as just a community member, I've been able to really live out that passion and to help find not just alternatives for our youth so that they, as a deterrent to gun violence, but also being present in the community. And every time I have to talk to a grieving mother, every time I have to pray for a family, every time I have to show up at another funeral and look in the casket of another young life that has been snuffed out by gun violence, it only makes me want to do more. It only makes me want to have these conversations with the hope that one more life will be saved, that another young life will go on into old age and more. So that's just a little bit. I look forward to hearing from others, but definitely this is something we have to change, right? Something has to be done. This conversation, I believe, is another step toward a solution to the gun violence that has ravaged not just this community, but so many communities across this country. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Pastor. Nikkia, thank you again for joining us. And I just want to say I'm so very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Mind speaking next? I'm not going to ask you to relive your tragedy, but perhaps you can speak to those and maybe for those who have experienced a similar loss.
Yes. I say this all the time. It's a word for a mother, a child losing his mother, you're an orphan. A spouse losing a mate, you're a widower. But it's no word for a mother, a parent losing their child, because it's not supposed to happen. It's unnatural. The grief that we as families, a lot of us convert, some of us don't speak out or don't talk about it. Me, on the other hand, I'm my son's voice. I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to keep until hopefully something gets done. It's a pain that you cannot imagine. It's not like Jahaj was sickly, like we were waiting for him something to happen. He had an illness. Jahaj was gunned down. And the part that hurts the most to me as a mom, is that as a single mom at that time, raising my children, my fear was he would get killed by a police officer, or he would get killed by a white person. My son got killed by somebody that looked just like him. Somebody that he went to school with, or that he played with, that grew up in the same community. That hurts more. And it hurts more that us as a community, somewhat, we condone it, because it's like, oh, that's so-and-so's son, or that's Lulu John's daughter, or son, or whatever. No, we can't keep doing it. Like, what wrong is wrong. We are telling our kids that this is okay. It's not okay. I don't want no other parent, no other family to have to go through what me and my family are going through right now, when all we have to do is just do what's right. Just do what's right. Just do what's right in the situation. It's like, we got to stand together. We do more against each other than we do for each other. And it has to stop. It has to stop somewhere. A lot of us mothers, we know what our kids be doing. Not to say that we condone it, but we do be aware of some of the stuff that they doing. If we're aware, we as the mom, we have so much power. It's time for us to start using our power with our children. Like, no, it's not okay. No, I'm not going to condone this. No, this is not right. So it seems like to me that maybe we could start in the community. Maybe us moms need to start. We need to start and pull together and see what we could do for these kids, because it doesn't make sense. Jihad should be here.
Thank you so much for sharing. Congressman Pallone, can you tell us a little bit more about your intersection and experience, perhaps even from the legislative side or other action with gun violence?
Absolutely, and thank you for being our moderator, and of course the Asbury Park Press for sponsoring this. But I want to thank particularly Nikkia Jennings-Fitzpatrick, because it's always good to see when someone has such a loss, in this case, that they've decided that they're going to speak out, and rather than just be silent or stay in their home, come out and say, what can we do so that this doesn't happen again? So I appreciate that. And of course, I know Pastor Semaj Vincent, because he's been involved in so many community activities, and your effort, of course, to try to see what can be done to prevent violence, looking not only at guns, which is, I guess, what I'm going to talk about, but also trying to, find opportunities for young people, so they don't, so they don't turn to violence, whether it's recreation or, education or whatever. But the problem, I'll try to be brief because I'd rather take some questions, but in terms of Congress, look, the problem is, for many years, I've been advocating and voting for three basic things in terms of gun safety. One is universal background checks. There are too many loopholes, the gun club exception, the friends exception. We could go through the whole list. And then a ban on assault weapons, which I should mention that the president reiterated today. He had an event today in Washington, President Biden, where he reiterated the need for an assault weapons ban. And you should understand that we had an assault weapons ban in the beginning years when I was in Congress, and then it just expired because the Republicans, and I'm trying not to be too partisan here today, but frankly wouldn't renew it when they were in the majority. And we've been having a hard time renew it no matter who's in the majority. So the fact that the president is now saying he wants to do that, I think, is significant. And then the third thing, which is something that my colleague Bonnie Watson-Coleman, who's in the adjacent district, she represents Trenton and the western part of Central Jersey, has been advocating for a limitation on the rounds of weapons. The fact that you can shoot so many bullets at once. Okay, now I've been advocating these three things for years, but we really haven't been able to implement them, primarily, and I have to be partisan because of Republican opposition. But what's happened that's new, I suppose, relatively new, is that in the last few months, as you know, we've just had a lot more mass murders that have brought the gun violence and gun safety issue to attention, to the national attention, more so than ever. But at the same time, the negative aspect is this Supreme Court decision that limits, and we don't know how far, but limits to some extent what Congress can do in terms of gun safety because of the Supreme Court's opinion that limitations on the Second Amendment, are unconstitutional. And the most frightening thing about this was this idea that that the New York and New Jersey as well had limited the concealed weapons, that you had to have a separate license. Even if you had a license to have a gun in your house, you had to have a separate license and show justifiable need to get a concealed weapons license so that you could carry a concealed weapon in public. The Supreme Court struck that down, and so now the question is, what can states do? And of course, New Jersey is trying to figure out what we can do. But that court opinion, as all of you know, we don't know how far it goes. In other words, for example, if we passed an assault weapons ban, would the court say that that's too much of a limitation? Would they say that background checks are too much of a limitation? We just don't know. And so it's just very disconcerting, very upsetting to think that with all the gun violence and the increase in mass murders, and of course, Nikkia talked about this with her son, that we now have a court that is saying that some of these limitations may be unconstitutional, and therefore the government can't even do it. Now, the last thing I wanted to say is that Congress has taken some actions recently that I think are significant, and I'll just try to list them. The one was that a bipartisan bill, which was the first bipartisan gun safety bill that we've passed in anybody's memory, that the president signed just a couple of weeks ago. And, some have said, well, it doesn't go very far, but I do want to mention a couple of things. I mean, first, it has enhanced background checks for people under 21. So, because, you can buy a gun 18 in a lot of states, but this says that there's going to be an enhanced check for people that are 18 to 21, which I think is significant. And then it does seek to close some of the loopholes, not the ones that I've mentioned, but the boyfriend loophole. I could talk about that, but I won't unless you ask me to. And also penalties for what we call straw purchasing. But perhaps the most important thing goes along with kind of what Pastor Semaj was saying: investments in children's and family services, particularly mental health services, but other areas as well in the community that, hopefully won't just be about gun safety, but also about trying to create a better atmosphere in the community and help for people that have mental health problems that might turn to the use of guns and violence. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic because I don't think we should be. I think the fact that we were able to pass something and the president was able to sign it was significant, even though it doesn't go very far. But at the same time, we do have the problem of enhanced murders and people getting killed. And we have this, problem with the court, which is the most disconcerting. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you for having me participate.
Thank you, Congressman. I hear similar emotions in each of your introductions of yourself, if we'll say. I hear passion, I hear hope, and I want to talk about those in a second, but I also hear frustration. I guess my question is, what is your biggest concern moving forward? And what do you think can really be done about it? I mean, each of you represent different ways to impact our communities. So as, in your realm of impact, what is your concern and how can we really move forward in addressing that concern?
But Jennifer, if I could say briefly, I think the biggest concern I have, and this is where the education comes into play and where, individuals can make a difference. It just seems like every time there's a murder or a mass murder or some headline about gun violence, that what I hear from my colleagues on the Republican side is that the answer isn't limitations on guns, but rather more guns. In other words, the only answer that we get a lot of times from the Republicans is that, well, we just have to have more guns. In other words, we have to arm ourselves, we have to arm the principal, we have to arm the teachers, we have to arm the people in the hospital. And there's no factual basis for the fact that if you have more guns, that's going to help you. And so I just, I wish from an education point of view, we could get the notion that somehow you're not going to be more protected because you have a gun or more guns or more dangerous, assault weapons. That's the one thing I would try to convey to everyone if possible.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I would like to add on to that, if I may, is that a lot of people I don't think they realize that. Okay, we have the issue with the gun. I'm totally for that. But the issue isn't quite the gun, it's who has the gun. It's the age, it's the people getting them illegally. You're not even supposed to really have a gun. I mean, you can have a gun legally if you register, but it's all the illegal guns that's getting in here. The other thing that I wanted to mention or touch on is that we take away so much from our youth. If we had age appropriate things for these children to do, maybe they wouldn't be doing some of the things that they want to do or that they're doing. They're what they say the devil's playground. Like it's like they idle hands. It's a devil's playground. We're taking things away, but we're not putting things back where they have things to do. So maybe we should start focusing on things, age appropriate things for these kids to do, especially that age group, that sixth grade to 12th grade. You have a lot of kids out here who maybe don't have big father figures, or a lot of times mom's at work, dad's at work, everybody's working. These kids have nowhere to go and nothing to do. They out here in the street. They linking up with the big homie or the big brother, or hey, come do this. Hey, come do this. Find something productive for these kids to do. Maybe start giving them little jobs, where they could get legal money,
Yeah.
It's a
No,
suggestion.
listen, Nikkia, I really appreciate what you're saying, right? And that's a lot of the work that I've been involved in, and and really trying, how do we find this alternative? And Jennifer, just to answer your question directly, I think my biggest frustration is that we've had in our country a switching of values, right? No longer does human life matter to the degree that it used to matter. Now it's all about money, right? It's all about power. It's all about fortune and fame, but human lives just don't matter. And when we
Our
look at
music.
a lot of the policies, right, and I want to thank Congressman Pallone, because he's been at the forefront of so many policies that are just that say, listen, human lives matter, right? And we won't go to the many that are there because we're talking about gun violence today, but really we've lost the value of human lives. And so as a result, the government even are putting more money into prison systems than they are into education, right? The government is shifting, that you can determine, unfortunately, somebody's trajectory in life by the zip code in which they're born and reside, right? Because of the lack of resources or the abundance of resources, right? It's just this huge gap in between, but we've really lost the value of human lives. And so I get so frustrated because I hear people being so hypocritical. And let me, I'm a Christian pastor, right? But there are many people who claim to be Christians who have really lost the value of Christianity, which is that love, that that human life, that that people having what we call the social determinants of health, right? That's what Jesus talked about all throughout his ministry. And we have people who claim to be Christians, pastors even, who claim to be Christians, that whose actions, whose rhetoric whose sermons and politics just completely differ from that. And so my biggest frustration, as you can tell by the passion that that I'm speaking with, is just that we have lost the value of humanity. And my prayer every day, I encourage people, I try to do whatever I can, my actions, my work, is how do we restore the value in humanity that once existed, where life was the most important thing ever. Because I can remember, Nikkia, as you were saying, my mother, and my grandmother always saying, idle mind is a devil's workshop, right? Scripture talks about how if you kick one devil out but don't replace it, then 7 more come or 30 more come and fill the house, right? That we have to find ways to give alternatives. And we have to find, and it takes funding to do that. And I have to say, while I'm on this, I want to send a shout out and a big applause to the Asbury Park Police Department. I know been in conversations with Lieutenant Lorenzo Pedway, and he's done a phenomenal job, and they're doing a phenomenal job in trying to create those type of programs. There's wrestling programs, right, that they're trying to get in place. There's a boxing program they just got the word for. We're working with the Police Athletic League and Interfaith Neighbors create this smarter startup where we can take teenagers, as Nikkia was talking about, in that prime age range, to say, instead of being an entrepreneur in the streets illegally, why don't you learn how to be a legal entrepreneur so that you can start your own business, earn legal money, and live not looking over your shoulders, but live looking ahead and creating a stepper for other young people to follow behind you. And so there's a lot of work that's being done, but there's so much more that has to be done. And I believe if we can find ways to stop operating in silos, but bring all of our power together, then we can sincerely do what one of Dr. King's protege says: we can punch holes in the darkness. And that's what I believe we can do if we collectively come together and work and provide alternatives, so that these options of guns and gun violence and gangs become less and less influential to the positive pathways that people and young people can take in their lives.
Thank you all so much for all of those responses. I do want to bring in a comment from one of our viewers, and I want to thank them, Jackson Jewell, for participating in the conversation. Their question/comment: why aren't there more supporting agencies for mental health and community centers for children to engage in year-round? So this is exactly what we're talking about. We need more community centers, agencies, role models, etc., especially in low-income communities.
And see, a lot of the other problem is that a lot of the kids do want to participate in things, but they can't afford it. So they get left on a burner. They standing on the sideline watching, and they get tired of watching. So they start doing stuff. I remember my son was playing football. He took his sneakers off. Somebody on the sideline stole his sneakers. So it's like, give these kids something to do. Like I don't think they want to be bad. Nobody just wakes up and say, hey, let me see what badness I could get into today. Some of them don't have a choice. So let's start giving them positive choices, give them positive outlooks, give them little incentives. So maybe they don't have to steal the sneakers. They could get the sneakers,
Yeah, I definitely agree with that so much. My wife and I have spearheaded and created a nonprofit called Inspire Your Life. And that nonprofit is all about how do we create and tap into the genius that exists within these young people. And so one of the reasons, that, and I can say we hold this camp, right? It's a 2-week camp. We call them break camps. So there's one during the summer, there's one during winter break, and we hope to have spring break. But the reason that it is not longer, or the reason that it's not year round, is simply funding, right? And I think that, again, as I mentioned earlier, if we can find a way to make sure the same access to resources are available in certain zip codes as in other zip codes, then we can change the trajectory. But here is the issue. Here is the issue that there is so much wealth in poverty, right? We have so many poverty pimps who know that if we can keep certain people impoverished, if we can keep resources out of their community, then we can get rich on gun sales. We can get rich on penal systems. We can get rich on all types of programs and things that are in place because there's poverty. If we can let there be quality education from the beginning, right? If we can find ways to provide, these opportunities from the beginning of their lives and shape them so that gun violence is not attractive, that gangs are not the most attractive thing in the community, then I know that we can definitely make a difference. And so my plea is for programs who do the work, right, that we just need funding for it.
Let me just say that, as I think was mentioned in the introduction, I've been around for a while as a congressman, and it is true that a lot of the programs that we used to have in the 60s or 70s, as part of an anti-poverty program under Johnson and others, I'm really going back now. A lot of those things disappeared. I mean, they did exist when I was a kid, and they don't exist now. Now, I would say that, there are a few things that we're trying to do. We did have, as I mentioned, in this Safer Communities Act, the bill that the president recently signed that was bipartisan, there is funding for mental and behavioral health. And there's, things like funding for the community health centers, which I know there's one in Asbury Park, for school-based mental health, for telehealth services for kids. And also, I should mention that we just implemented as of July 1st, because I know suicide is a huge problem with young people. We just implemented, it came out of my committee, a national suicide prevention lifeline. This is the 988 number, but it's not just the lifeline. It's not just the number. There's also money to support that and particularly to look at help for young people. One thing that I did locally that we hope, that just came out of the Appropriations Committee was a $500,000 appropriations for the Boys and Girls Club that specifically, which of course was founded in Asbury, but exists now in Long Branch and Neptune and Red Bank, for victims, for victims of domestic violence. A lot of times you have kids that, get involved in crime, who themselves were victims of abuse, right? And so this is something that we're going to hopefully have for the Boys and Girls Club, so they can expand some of their programs for those young people. So, Pastor, look, you've been such an advocate, and I know most of the time you're just doing this through your own church or, raising money locally through the community rather than federal or state funds. But we're going to try to do more. But, it's not what it used to be. I remember we had, I don't even know if none of you probably, you're all too young to remember the whole anti-poverty program, which was designed to try to eliminate poverty in the 60s and early 70s. And most of that just is not around anymore, and provided summer jobs. I used to have a job when I was in high school at Fort Monmouth. It doesn't exist anymore, but they had all these jobs, for kids that, that couldn't find something else. I'm not saying I didn't grow up in poverty, but, it was programs for kids in high school, which a lot of times were a little better than, maybe working at the amusement park. Not that I'm criticizing that, because you learned some more skills. Thank you, Jennifer.
So I think you have all pivoted to the next topic, which is what's behind your passion. I hear that despite how much we feel that things aren't changing enough and things might, they do seem to be getting worse, I still hear this hope and I still hear your intent on being very persistent. So what is it that makes you keep pushing? Before the broadcast went live, Nikkia was speaking about maybe one of the worst times in her life, but in thinking about her son, she had the biggest smile. So it's what is it that makes you hopeful, and how can we spread this and instill this hope in others?
Well, maybe I'll start by saying I just think that the outpouring that we've seen in terms of marches, people contacting my office, asking that they want to do something about gun violence, is much greater today than it was. And I think that can be translated into action, whether it's, action for some of the gun safety initiatives I mentioned, or it's action the way Pastor Semaj mentioned, to get more funding for programs that will give kids something to do in the summer, or address mental health that's been mentioned. I know that Nikkia, it was I don't want to say interesting, but I guess that's how I saw it when you mentioned, you thought that the police. More likely that that your son might have been a victim of police violence than a neighbor's. But the fact of the matter is, when I talk to the police, and including they're very at least a significant number of them are supportive of trying to do more in terms of community policing and the police involved in the community. We have when we give grants out at the federal level to towns for more police or more police equipment, it's attached to it is community policing requirements. And that means that the police have to be involved in the community, not only in patrolling on foot, but also doing things like, the police athletic league and other things where they actually get involved. Now, to what extent that happens, depends on the community, but it is part of that. And of course, the police have actually been very supportive of the police organizations of these limitations with regard to gun safety, because they don't see it as a positive that that guns proliferate. This idea that I'm trying to dispel that a lot of people have is somehow if I arm myself, or I arm the teacher, or I arm the principal, that's going to provide more safety for me personally or in the school. I don't believe that. And the police organizations have, tried to make that understood. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for hope here, but the main thing is that people are more and more trying to get involved the way Nikkia is. And so that's why I think I'm not a pessimist, although I tend to be pessimistic too, but I'm not right now.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think we're tired of burying our children.
Yeah.
And our young men at that, not just more so the young men over the young women, but we just tired. My hope is that no other family, no other mother, no other father, siblings have to bury their loved one. It's a horrible thing. Every day, it's nothing that you will ever get over. Every day, it's a reminder that he's not here. Every day, if I hear something about somebody else's child getting killed, it triggers what happened to my own child. It's like my heart goes out to that family, because I know what they're about to go through. I know what journey this is going to be for them, because it's a journey. It's something that you don't wake up today and be like, oh, okay, I'm better. It's not that. So I feel like also that if I know I'm grieving, I know that my son's death impacted a lot of people. That touches the mental illness too. Like, that's something that should be offered to the people if they're willing to accept it. Though that should be offered to the children in the community, the children that may have knew or know these people that are getting killed. It's on a community level. Like I didn't just lose Jahaj. It's a whole bunch of people that lost Jahaj. So.
Yeah.
And it hurts. It's just that I speak out about it more than maybe the other mothers do, but I know that they probably suffer in silence. You know, I know their pain. I know it. So it's like, let me be that hope for everybody else. Let's do something about it that maybe somebody else don't have to go through this again. You know, because it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah. Nikki, I just want to let you know, that I and so many others stand with you in your pain. It is his life was a loss to the community, and his and you, as you said earlier, you are his voice, and certainly you're speaking up and keeping his continuing to speak his name, continues to keep his memory and his legacy alive, and so we stand with you in your pain, and I do pray for you and so many other mothers and fathers and siblings and families, that God, the God who comforts our grieving hearts, will comfort yours, at every time of memory. And I do believe that, as the scripture says, that God will exchange our sorrow for joy, and that in some way, somehow, I'm praying that through your work that you find joy in this moment. Jennifer, the time, or where I find my hope is in people like Nikkia, right, who are speaking up. My
Mhm.
hope is in I get hope when people like Congressman Pallone, who are at the highest levels fighting and speaking and trying to create legislation, making funds available. My hope overall is in God, right? Who promises us that though we may have trials and tribulations, that we can still be of good cheer, for God, for Jesus Christ has overcome the world, right? That if I do the work, that if we do the work, that if we continue to fight against it, that eventually that wall is going to fall. Eventually, something's going to change. And I don't lack in hope, because my hope is so much greater than myself. It's so much greater than the work that I can do or we can do. But my hope is about a future. I have two young Black sons, right, who are now 8 and 11 years old, and I want to see them grow up and grow old and prosper and live out their purpose and the fulfillment of their calling. But not just for my sons. I want it for everybody's sons and everybody's daughters, whether, no matter whether they're Black or white or Hispanic or Asian. I want every child, every life to live right and to be all that they can be. Um, and and I'm optimistic because my hope lies in the divine God. And so I'm going to keep on working, and I know these two wonderful people are going to keep, and all of us are keep on working. And I believe that if more of us can have hope, if more of us can continue to put our collective minds together, if more of us can continue to speak truth to power, right, and let and speak truth to the greedy, right, who profit so much off of poverty and gun violence, then I believe that a change is going to come. And so I believe it was Sam Cooke, right, the old artist, that he said he believes that it's been a long time coming, but I know that a change is going to come. And so I stand with Sam Cooke, and I also stand with so many of our ancestors and so many of those who fought for freedoms. And I believe that our job is to pick up the mantle and continue to fight for freedom until all of us are free, which includes legislation and just the getting rid of some of these guns, right? And I know Congressman Pallone knows this, that we live in a country where there are more guns than people. It just does not make sense, right? And when we look at some of the other countries and that are developed countries around the world, where there are a whole lot less guns, then we see a whole lot less violence. And so Congressman Pallone was right. More guns do not equal safer communities. Less guns equal safer communities.
So there's a comment from one of our viewers, Suzanne Barton, asks, why does it seem like gun owners of automatic weapons have more rights than our communities that are victims of this horrific gun violence epidemic?
Well, the problem, Suzanne, is that, look, from my perspective, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, until this Supreme Court in the last few years, was meant, I believe, by the framers of the Constitution, you know, the Jeffersons and Washington and Adams, was meant to, what was a protection for the militia, in other words, for the armed forces, not an individual right. Now, we could argue over, you know, whether the court was right or not, but they decided a few years ago that the Second Amendment was now an individual right. In other words, a right guaranteed to individuals. And, you know, that was, I believe that case was decided where Washington, D.C. had outlawed handguns. And they said, you can't do it. A state, a district cannot say that people cannot have handguns under any circumstances because that violates the Constitution. Now, that's the law. I mean, that is the way they've interpreted it. But I don't think that we need to go the next step and glorify this. I mean, the problem is that there has to be some limitation, and the Supreme Court hasn't said there isn't any limitation on this individual right to bear arms. But this latest decision with concealed weapons was very, I think went too far, because I mean, imagine basically it said that if, you know, a state like New Jersey has a license to have a gun in your house, which you have to fill out a form and go through a background check. Okay. But then the state said that if you wanted to have a concealed weapon and carry it in public, you know, under my jacket here, that I had to have a justifiable reason. I had to show, for example, that maybe I was a victim of violence, or I was a private detective. I don't know, whatever. Okay. And the court said, no, that is not the case. And you know, some people said to me, and I don't mean to make a joke about it, but sometimes you have to laugh a little bit. Somebody said to me the other day, well, I guess we're going back to the Old West. And I said, no, we're not going back to the Old West. This is worse than the Old West, because in the Old West, at least from what I know from the cowboy movies, you had to wear the gun, you had to have the holster on you. And if I wanted to challenge you to duel, you knew I had a weapon and you had a weapon. And okay, we're going to go to duel. I'm not advocating that, but I'm saying it was kind of, in the Old West, the guy who concealed the weapon and shot you in the back was considered a bad guy, right? So we're way beyond that now. We're basically saying that you have a right to have a concealed weapon, which I would carry under my jacket here on the street. Well, where is that a protected right under the Constitution? So, Suzanne, I mean, you're right in the saying that the court in this decision, in my opinion, is going too far and giving gun owners very expansive rights. And the question is, how far does that go? And my worry is that it may go much further and say, for example, that you can't ban assault weapons. So this is the most disconcerting or the most pessimistic aspect. You would have thought that the court would have recognized the fact that with all the mass murders and everything going on, they shouldn't expand the right to have a concealed weapon, but they did. And that's the problem that we face. I don't want it on a negative note, but it is negative. I mean, there's nothing positive about this.
No, I agree with you, you know, and not to mention, Congressman, when the Second Amendment was written, right, the guns of that day were muskets and flintlock pistols. So, you know, so it was, you know, shoot around, got to take time to grab the next one, load it up, and then shoot the next one, right? You know, so it's nothing compared to these AR-15s with 30 rounds in a magazine, or, you know, God forbid they have the bump stock where they can put, you know, just hundreds, and they're shooting out at major velocities with weapons. They can go farther. So, I mean, the Second Amendment, the framers were not talking about the guns, the weapons of war that we are saying individuals need to have on today. And so I definitely, obviously, am one who thinks that the court is interpreting this wrong. And I really think that they are interpreting it over, to the benefit of those who find, who obtain wealth from these gun laws that are in place. And so I think in New Jersey, we have elected some of the most of the right people, right, into Congressman Pallone being one of our great elected officials. We have some great senators and people who are serving on the federal level. I think we need to, in New Jersey, do some work in voting, right? In voting for on local and county levels for the officials who see gun rights differently and who can make a difference. And also, continuing to speak out and to speak our voice and to let our voice be heard, that we don't want this type of these legislations in place. We believe gun violence is wrong, and that in the same way that they've upended so many other laws for human rights, that laws about gun rights ought to be seen as human rights also.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no.
I wanted to call out a comment from one of our viewers, Tyrone Asia Sr., who was, his comment is related to exactly what we're talking about, is whether or not the Second Amendment is obsolete. So I think we talked about that one. We are nearing the end of our hour together, and I want to make sure we leave on a positive note. And a good conversation is one that leaves you with homework, or at least that's how I feel. So my last question to everyone is, what's the call to action? What do we do now?
Well, I'm going to just pick up on what Pastor Semaj said. I mean, you just got to get involved. And that's why Nikkia is such a good example. I mean, she could have easily just, sat in her room and said, I suffered through this, and this is not something that I'm going to take action on. But she did. She decided to have her son's death become a call to action. And that's what you have to do. I think next Friday, I don't know if it's next Friday, but I think there's a march in Asbury Park. I believe it's next Friday.
On the 15th.
On the 15th. Whether it's showing up at a march or writing letters or, going on social media, or as he said, voting, all these things are a form of action. And then there's also the personal action of educating people about, what to do, that having additional weapons is not the answer, and that education about that and education in general is important. And so whether it's limitations for gun safety, or it's education, or it's funding, all these things require community action. And that's I think the most important thing that can come out of this.
I agree.
Yeah, and so one thing I would say is, is that it's be a positive force in the alternatives for these youth. And, for those who are able, volunteer your time to be present at some of these, programs, whether it's in the school system during the day, being a positive role model, or whether it's, just around the community, just speaking life into these youth and letting them know that they have purpose beyond what is easiest or what is presented to them. If you have, volunteer by transporting youth and saying, hey, listen, I'll bring you from your home to this positive outlet, be it basketball or wrestling or boxing or a summer camp or, break camp, like the one that we run. And for those who have the means, right, donate, right, allow your resources to help. The federal government can only do so much, but those who have the resources to be able to donate to nonprofits that are actually making a difference, that are providing alternatives, that are creating spaces so that young people can find and discover the fullness of life and who they are, their purpose, and really become contributing citizens to our community. And so I definitely believe that a lot can be done if, yes, we vote, but also volunteer, and also for those who have the ability to donate to programs that create alternatives for young people, so that and those programs would then help really make a positive difference and impact, so that we can have less and less funerals for those who are victims of gun violence, and we can have more celebrations for new businesses being created, for new creations, for books that are written, for film releases, for music that's coming out, right? For new science, inventions, and technology. I believe all of that is in our community. And so we just need to create the spaces so that we can see these young people blossom and flourish. Because you know what? I wouldn't mind taking a trip to Mars, but being able to come right back to Earth. And I think when the young people in our community can figure that out.
And I think that with the walk, it's good to have a walk, but it's not going to start there and it's not going to end there. We have to continue it. It has to keep going. Got to keep going. Got to keep bringing everybody out. Like the first time might not be a hit, but don't stop. Keep going. Keep going. Keep rooting for our community. We need this. The kids need this.
Well, I want to say a special thank you to each one of the panelists for their time. I want to thank the Asbury Park Press and USA Today Network for organizing this event. Thank you to the viewers for watching and submitting questions. I hope everyone has a fantastic day and remembers to vote and to volunteer and to create spaces and to do more for each other and to keep going.